After having sex with my childhood sweetheart, the Alpha, he called a doctor to ask me to wash off the mark. I'm getting married next month and I don't want my Omega to misunderstand me. He loves to be jealous, and I can't bear to make him cry. You're also an older leftover O. You can't go on a blind date with another Alpha while wearing my mark. He threw me a check cruelly and coldly. You've been with me for so long. I won't let you down. I will send you an invitation on my wedding day. Remember to come to the banquet. 1. I suffer every time Mark passes his susceptible period. There is not a single piece of healthy skin on his body. There are purple bite marks all around the gland. The aroma of rum is like a transparent cover, enveloping me tightly. I raised my weak hands, pushed the Alpha on my body, and begged in a low voice, Mark, I really can't do it anymore. Let me rest for a while. 7 days. Since I stepped into the villa, all my impressions came from Mark. The Alpha on my body ignored my pleas and tightened his hands around my waist. The glands felt a tingling sensation, and the aroma of rum forcefully invaded, wantonly invading the territory of the bamboo scent. I was trembling all over, tortured by the powerful pheromones. Tiny physiological tears flowed down my cheeks. Mark frowned and pressed his red and swollen eyelids roughly with his fingertips. Don't cry. It's annoying to watch. A sour feeling welled up in my heart, and my nose hurt. I muttered in a hoarse voice, The murderer! The scent of bamboo is softly and obsessively entwined with the scent of rum. Mark is always particularly aggressive during his susceptible period. He made me cry in a cruel way, but he didn't let me cry. 2. After Mark's susceptible period ended, I lay exhausted on the bed and picked up my laptop to reply to work messages. There was a sound of dripping water coming from the bathroom. Half an hour later, the sound of water gradually stopped and Mark came out wearing a bathrobe. He looked at me, frowning impatiently. Hurry up and take a shower. I opened my arms and asked him to hold me. I don't have the strength. Can you hold me? The marked Omega will always try to find ways to get close to his Alpha. Mark glanced at me coldly and said, George, don't be so delicate. I frowned, hiding the disappointment and embarrassment in my eyes. 6 years. I can only get a little tenderness from Mark in bed. He was cold and emotionless under the bed, like a piece of ice that could not be warmed up. After washing up, Mark had already asked his aunt to clean up the mess in the house. The aroma of rum and bamboo is so faint that it is almost invisible. The 7 days of madness seemed like a dream. After dinner, Mark took me to the gland department of the federal hospital. I was stunned, a little confused. Are you feeling unwell? No. I have scheduled a mark removal surgery for you. There was a buzzing in my ears and my body felt cold. I reached out to hold onto the seat next to me to stop myself from falling. Why? I'm getting married next month and I don't want my Omega to misunderstand me. He loves to be jealous, and I can't bear to make him cry. Can't bear to let him cry? What about me? At that moment, I felt as if I was dragged into an icy lake. A biting chill rose up from the bottom of my heart, as if I was frostbitten. I lost all feeling in my body and was left with only the coldness. The doctor called my name and asked me to prepare for surgery. Seeing that I was standing still, Mark spoke again. George, you are almost 28 years old. The alliance stipulates that if a 28-year-old Omega cannot find an Alpha partner on his own, the alliance system will help you match an Alpha with a high pheromone compatibility. You can't go on a blind date with another Alpha with my Mark. He remembered that I was almost 28, but I forgot that I will be 28 next week. Mark handed me a check cruelly and coldly. I have paid for the surgery. You have been with me for so long. I will not let you down. On the wedding day, I will send you an invitation. Remember to come to the banquet. George, this is the end of it between you and me. 3. I requested that the surgery be performed without anesthesia. I want to make myself remember this heart-wrenching pain forever. The sharp scalpel cuts through the gland, and the rum aroma is peeled off bit by bit. The incandescent light overhead was blindingly bright. Under the light, my face turned paler and paler. Mark's words were like wedges, hammering into my heart word by word. After being with Mark for 6 years, I thought I would be the one to spend the rest of my life with him. After all, there is no other Omega around him except me. 6 years ago, Mark and I met again at a cocktail party. The innocent boy in my memory has transformed into an upright alpha. The only thing that remains unchanged is that expressionless face. Mark is like his pheromones. If you get a little bit of it on you, you'll get very drunk. When I first started pursuing him, I didn't have any expectations. A gifted person like Mark must have seen all kinds of Omegas. Unexpectedly, after some pulling and trying, Mark and I rolled onto the same bed. Mark is strong and uninhibited in bed, and his demands are great. I was intoxicated by the aroma of rum. Let him do whatever he wants. It's been 6 years, and I think he has a place for me in his heart. Now that I think about it, I was just being too sentimental. George, you were such a joke. When I came out of the surgery, Mark was gone. He sent a message to my computer, saying that he had left early because of something at the company. I was stunned for a few seconds, curled my lips sarcastically, and blocked him. On my 28th birthday, many friends sent me blessings. I sat in my apartment and ate a whole cake in silence. Warm tears fell on the cake. The cake tasted bitterly sweet in my mouth. I have been with Mark for 6 years, and every year on my birthday I need to give him various hints to remind him not to forget to give me a gift. Without my reminder this year, he unsurprisingly forgot. After eating the cake in silence, I took out a box and packed up everything related to Mark in the apartment. Clothes, shoes, cups, watches, a big box full of things. After packing up my things, I threw them into a corner, thinking of handing them over to Federal Express tomorrow. The clock struck 12. I gave up and turned on my computer. A strange name appeared in the spouse column: Charles. The alpha in the photo has clear contours. The curve of his jawline is as deep and firm as if carved by a knife. His eyebrows are straight, and there is a long and thin scar at the end of his eye. It is not deep, but it is attached to his thin eyelids, adding a bit of rogueness. Alpha's address is the Nanyang star, 20 light years away from the capital star. It would be nice to live on another planet. The contact information includes Charles's computer number. I thought about it and dialed the unfamiliar string of symbols. Hello, I'm George, your Omega partner. Companion. The voice was deep and slightly sandy. Yes, the system automatically matched it. Sorry. I was out herding sheep all day and didn't have time to check the information on the optical computer. Herding sheep? His job? Nanyang Star is indeed a planet with a relatively backward economy. After a few seconds of silence, I was the first to break the silence. The system message suggests that we live together as soon as possible. I will go to Nanyang Star to find you in a few days. Okay. Call me when you get there and I'll pick you up at the port. 5. The airship is anchored in the harbor. Charles stood out in the crowd. He is fierce and handsome, with a righteous face and a body full of tendons. He walked over and took the luggage from my hand. I followed him cautiously. He is 195 centimeters tall, and one of his steps is equivalent to 2 of mine. Charles noticed my difficulty and slowly slowed down his pace. I'm out of food at home, so I'm going to the supermarket to stock up on some vegetables. Well, I just happened to be buying some daily necessities as well. After the brief conversation, there was a long silence. While choosing dishes, Charles asked me if there were any dishes that I was allergic to or particularly disliked. I pursed my lips for a moment and answered honestly, I don't really like fish. Charles nodded. I didn't know it at that time, but from then on, there was no fish on the dinner table at home. I don't like fish, but Mark does. One time he took the initiative to pick up some food for me. After my joy, I told him frankly that I didn't like fish. After listening to me, Mark coldly threw 2 words at me: spoiled. I laughed and retorted, I'm not spoiled. I'm easy to feed. Mark said coldly. After that, he never took the initiative to pick up food for me again. What I didn't expect was that Charles moved to the second bedroom, leaving the master bedroom for me. You are an Omega and I am an Alpha. As your partner, it is my duty to take care of you. I clutched the handle of the suitcase, and my nose felt sore. Please pack your bags first. I'll make dinner. Charles simply copied 2 dishes and boiled a vegetable soup. When I came out after packing my luggage, he was serving the meal. 2 people, a small home, a lamp, a simple meal. I have imagined this scenario countless times over the past 6 years. George, wash your hands and eat. Without any warning, 2 lines of tears rolled down the corners of my eyes. I turned my back, wiped my face, and hummed softly. 6. After dinner, I put the dishes into the dishwasher. Charles was afraid that I would feel uncomfortable, so he went back to his room early. I stood at the door, clutched the corners of my clothes, and mustered up the courage to knock on the door. Charles, I want to talk to you. He closed the door and followed me to the living room. I lifted up my collar and peeled off the barrier with trembling hands. The mutilated gland was exposed under the bright light. Charles, I've had a failed relationship, and I just had a gland removal surgery a week ago. As a legal partner, I should confess to him that not every alpha can accept an omega partner with a defective gland. Charles didn't say anything, but stood up and helped me put the barrier stickers back on. George, this is not your fault. The fault is that of the person who hurt you. In the quiet night, Charles whispered comfort to me. All the emotions seemed to be sucked into a ball of cotton, stuck in the throat and unable to move. Since the operation, no one has asked me if it hurts. George, I have never been in a relationship, nor do I have any emotional experience. My parents died very early, and I am the only one at home. I have a little money, but I don't have any hobbies. In return, Charles confessed his basic situation to me. I looked up at him. My heart felt soft and painful, and for a moment I couldn't tell what kind of mood this was. Charles, please take care of me in the future. George, thank you for your care. 7. 1 week after moving to Nanyang Star, I received a call from my good friend Paul. He scolded Mark for being blind and stood up for me. That Omega is not even 1/10 as good as you. Mark is such an idiot. I know why he called me. Today is Mark's wedding day. Through the TV screen, I saw the beautiful Omega. Omega's face was filled with a happy smile. Mark held his hand and put the ring on him. There was a hint of tenderness in his usually cold eyes. Bitterness, grievance, and sadness came back. My heart is wet. I interrupted Paul quietly. Let's not talk about him anymore. There was silence on the other end of the computer for a few seconds. George, I'm really happy that you think this way. It's worth spending 6 years to get to know someone clearly. Charles picked up the remote and changed the channel. He handed me a box of tissues and went back to his room silently. After lunch, Charles invited me to visit his farm. Blue sky and white clouds, endless green carpet, and flocks of sheep like white pearls scattered among them. This scene is as beautiful as an oil painting. Charles handed me a whip and said, "Want to try herding sheep?" I took the whip and walked with the flock of sheep on the grassland. Charles rode over to me, bent over and held out his hand. "Come up and try it? I'll take you. What will happen to the sheep if I leave?" He curled his eyes and smiled inconspicuously. "Don't worry. The whole grassland is mine. It won't be lost." I thought for half a second and put my hand on it. Charles grabbed my wrist and pulled me onto the horse, holding me tightly in his arms. My body tensed unnaturally. "Relax. I'll be your human cushion if you fall down." The wind whistled past my ears. I closed my eyes comfortably, and the haze in my heart dissipated little by little. Thank you, Charles. Thank you for making me happy. A month later, I had my first estrus period after the operation. The surging passion grew wildly in the body, and the fragrance of bamboo filled the entire room. With trembling hands, I took out the inhibitor from the drawer. But suppressants cannot suppress the overwhelming passion. The pain in the back of my neck was so intense that it felt like needles piercing me. I feel like a dried-up river, being mercilessly scorched by the sun. Charles noticed something was wrong. "George, what's wrong with you?" I responded to him with a groan of pain. He turned around to find the spare key and opened the door. Charles glanced at the inhibitor that fell to the ground. "I'll take you to the hospital." I was tortured by passion and my mind was in a mess. I reached out to grab him and begged humbly, "I want your pheromones. Just a little bit, it really hurts." The scent of rum and bamboo lingering deep in the glands. I couldn't help but burst into tears, and big tears rolled down my eyes. As soon as the scent of green grass came out, the scent of bamboo softly wrapped around it. Charles patiently released pheromones to soothe me. I clutched the bed sheets tightly, curled up into a ball in a mess, and trembled uncontrollably. Charles hugged me in his arms through the quilt, patted the quilt and whispered to me in a coaxing voice. After a moment, the remaining rum aroma was completely expelled. Charles's hand went to the barrier at the back of my neck. I hid back in fear. The pain of Mark cleaning is deeply engraved in my bones, which makes me afraid and scared. "Don't be afraid. I won't do anything to hurt you." Charles stayed home to take care of me during the estrus period. Whenever I cried out in pain, he would silently provide me with pheromones. Beyond that, there is no going beyond that. 9. Capital Star, on the top floor of an office building in the financial center. Mark felt uncomfortable wearing his wedding ring, so he took it off and threw it aside. On their 3rd anniversary, George gave him a pair of couple rings. He won't take it. George had a forced smile on his face. "I'm giving you the ring. It's up to you how you deal with it." Mark threw it into the trash can beside him without thinking. George stood there in a daze for a few seconds, then turned and left. It didn't take long for Mark to regret it. He personally rummaged through the trash can and picked up the ring. That time he put aside his pride and coaxed George for a long time before he finally calmed down. Coming out of his memories, Mark glanced at the time in the lower right corner of the electronic screen. George is in heat. During the estrus period, George will be particularly clingy, like a little tail that can't be shaken off. When he couldn't see anyone, he would pout his lips, with tears in his eyes, looking pitiful as if he was about to cry. In the past, he was there to accompany me. But during this estrus period, George probably needs to rely on suppressants to get through it. A few days ago, Mark received a package sent by George. There was no denying that he liked George. But compared to George, Mark loves power more. In order to become the real ruler of the Pei family, he agreed to the marriage. 10. Mark felt guilty about letting George undergo the gland removal surgery without telling him. He rang the bell and called his assistant. "Have you completed the transfer procedures for the villa?" The assistant's expression changed slightly. "Mark," George refused. "Tell him this apartment is his 28th birthday present." The assistant hesitated for a moment. "But George's 28th birthday has already passed." "After when?" "1 month ago, the day he was discharged from the hospital." After get off work, Mark asked the driver to drive the car to George's residence. The light that had been on for him for 6 years went out. The assistant told him that George was no longer in the Capital Star. The contact information was blocked. Mark had no choice but to find another way and call George's friend Paul's computer. "Where is he now?" The other end of the computer snorted coldly, with an undisguised tone of sarcasm. "You only know milk after the child dies. Mark, don't you think it's funny that you ask me this question now? I just want to know, where is he?" "George is very happy with his legal alpha." "Mark, you wasted George's 6 years. If you have any conscience, don't bother him." After saying that, Paul hung up the computer. Mark got out of the car and lit a cigarette. George has legal alpha. Then will he lie in the alpha's arms and act like a spoiled child? Will he expose his glands and let people bite him obediently, without crying out when it hurts? Will he remember the alpha's preferences? The more Mark thought about it, the uglier his expression became. He threw away the cigarette but raised his foot and crushed it hard. His cold and indifferent eyes darkened. "Check for me. Where's George now?" 11. After the estrus period ended, Charles took me to the hospital's gland department for an examination. I pinched the corner of my clothes a little awkwardly. Charles patted the back of my hand and said, "Don't think too much about it. It's just a physical check." The doctor and Charles are old acquaintances. Pheromone imbalance is not a big problem. Just take the medicine on time and adjust the body's pheromones. After giving me instructions, he found a reason to call Charles out. Charles, what is your relationship with him? He is the Omega listed in my household registration. The doctor was silent for a moment. With your status, you can choose better. He's fine. The doctor wanted to say something else. Charles patted his shoulder. He is your sister-in-law. He is the best in my heart. The doctor shrugged and spread his hands, smiling awkwardly. I apologize. I'm just not good at speaking. After leaving the hospital, Charles took me out for dinner. It is Chinese Valentine's Day and a hot pot restaurant is holding an event where couples can get free iced drinks by taking photos and checking in. The waiter looked at me expectantly. I was about to refuse when Charles agreed. He came over and sat next to me. You two can get closer and be more intimate. I looked up at Charles, bewildered. Charles put his arm around my shoulders, held my chin with his hand, rubbed it gently with his thumb, and looked at me steadily with his almond-shaped eyes. The scent of grass in the nose became stronger. My heartbeat became disrupted without me noticing. With a click, Charles and I were frozen in the Polaroid camera. After taking the photo, I immediately pulled away from Charles. You two are a perfect match. The waiter brought 2 bowls of lychee ice. Charles pushed in front of me. I remember you love lychees, but your stomach isn't very good, so don't be greedy. Just eat half a bowl. 12. It was Charles's birthday, and I was thinking of baking a birthday cake for him myself. Mark likes sweet things, but he is picky and thinks the cakes bought outside are too sweet. So I learned how to make desserts for him. Once, I accidentally burned my hand and went to seek comfort with red eyes. Mark blew on me a few times with a cold face. I held that finger and enjoyed myself all day. Just as the cake went into the oven, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, a beautiful Omega was standing at the door holding a bouquet of flowers. He looked at me with hostility. Who are you? Where is Charles? This is my home. Who are you? Your home. You are the Omega assigned to Charles by the system. He twitched his lips with a scornful smile on his face. Charles sympathizes with you and lets you stay at home to recover, but you should not be ungrateful and try to rely on him. As an Omega with incomplete glands, what makes you think you are worthy of Charles? His words pierce like thorns. Although Charles looks fierce, he is considerate and careful, and he can remember the details that others don't pay attention to. After moving to Nanyang Star, I have always been the one being taken care of. Charles is a great alpha, but I'm not as bad as he says. Being loved is everyone's right. You can't get the girl, so you come to me to stir up trouble. Don't you think you're ridiculous? Omega's face suddenly became ugly, with a hideous and distorted look. No matter how jealous you are, Charles will only be my alpha. After I finished talking to him, I looked up and saw Charles standing not far away. He looked at me with a faint smile in his eyes, so gentle that it made my heart palpitate. 13. The originally arrogant Omega immediately turned into a delicate little white flower when he saw Charles. Charles. The voice was soft and long, and pheromones overflowed. Charles ignored him and walked over to me and put his arm around my waist. Jason. I remember telling you that I'm not interested in you. Jason's eyes suddenly turned red. Charles, you don't like me? So do you like him? What's there to like about an Omega who has been abandoned by an alpha? Charles's eyes became cold, and he said condescendingly, Jason, I don't want to sound so harsh, but if you still call me brother, George is your sister-in-law. Is this how you treat your elders? George is great. He deserves everyone. The voice was tinged with inhuman coldness. Jason was so scared that he burst into tears and apologized to me with sobs. I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. It's your freedom to forgive or not. Charles's words gave me more confidence. I don't want to forgive you. Jason's tears fell even harder. He hurriedly piled the flowers and gifts at the door, found an excuse and left. After closing the door, Charles took the initiative to confess. Jason is the younger brother of my comrade. He confessed to me before, but I rejected him. I frowned and muttered, You don't have to explain it so clearly. Charles moved closer to me, threateningly. I backed away until I fell onto the sofa. Those deep eyes looked at me steadily, with my reflection reflected in the pupils. George, I don't want you to misunderstand. I stupidly asked, why don't you want me to misunderstand? When I met those extremely aggressive eyes, my heart started beating wildly as if I had lost weight, and heat surged on my cheeks. With a ding sound, the cake dough in the oven is baked. 14. Mark was having dinner with Omega when he received the message from his assistant. The moment he saw the photo, he accidentally knocked over the water cup beside him. The tall alpha put his arm around George's waist. George looked up at him shyly, his eyes rippling like a layer of spring lake water, very touching. That gentle and dedicated look once belonged only to me. After the meal, the scenes of being with George emerged in Mark's mind frame by frame. The person who was as precious as a pearl and jade, whose heart and eyes were filled with him, is now nestling in the arms of someone else. The gushing jealousy and anger seemed to overwhelm him. The haze in Mark's eyes grew heavier, making people feel uneasy. The next day, Mark went to Nanyang Star on the pretext of a development project. After finishing his work, he went to wait in the community where George lived. The scene before him made his blood boil. George nibbled on a ball of ice cream, arched his eyebrows in satisfaction after taking a bite, and scooped a spoonful to the alpha's mouth. The alpha crouched slightly, nodding and praising the ice cream for its deliciousness. The smile in George's eyes grew deeper, and he stood on tiptoes to wipe the ice cream off the alpha's mouth. The alpha hooked his arms around George's waist and continued to pull him closer. The two people's mouths were getting closer and closer. George. Mark opened the car door and got out, his voice hoarse and deep, with a sinister look in his eyes. George turned his head in panic, his knuckles turning white as he clutched the corner of his clothes. The alpha tilted his head and looked him over disdainfully, his hands on George's waist tightening. I haven't seen you for 2 months. Don't you recognize me? 15. Goodbye, Mark. My heart was unusually calm. The memories of the past 6 years flashed before my eyes like a kaleidoscope of memories. All the regrets, debts, and grievances disappeared in an instant. Charles looked at my face and protected me behind him. I squeezed his hand and told him not to worry. Mark frowned, his bloodshot eyes filled with anger. I looked at him and found him ridiculous. It was he who took me to the operating table without saying a word. Now he is the one staring at me with a look of catching someone having an affair. What do you want from me? Can't I find you if I have nothing to do? Cannot. Suddenly, I remembered the time when Mark and I first got together. I stick to him and get close to him whenever I have time. George, what do you have to do? You are so idle all day long. Can't I find you if I have nothing to do? Cannot. Mark, you and I both have families, so it's not appropriate to exchange pleasantries. George, why don't you want the room I gave you? To be honest, I can earn a lot of money, so I don't need your apartment. Since we have to break up, it's better to do it cleanly. Hearing this, Charles burst out laughing. I blushed a little because of his laughter. Mark, it's not decent to haunt your ex-boyfriend after breaking up. Mark's eyes slid to Charles, and he sneered disdainfully. George has liked me for 6 years. If you stand with me, you will be the only one who is not decent. You don't have a Mark yet, but you know what? After knowing each other for a month, he obediently exposed his glands for me to bite. Do you know how relaxed he is in my bed? A corner of my heart completely collapsed, and with a loud bang, it shattered into a pile of ruins accompanied by dust and ashes. Mark, I'm warning you not to take it too far. 16. I stopped the furious Charles. He's not worth fighting. Mark, you came to me now? Because you still have feelings for me? He pursed his lips and said nothing. For 6 years, I have always been the one who was so eager to please you. My friends all thought it was not worth it and called me love-brained. But I didn't think it was a big deal, and I never cared about gains and losses in relationships. I used to think you were good in every way except that you didn't like me enough. But now, I feel sorry for George, who foolishly approaches you with all his sincerity. George, I reached out and peeled off the barrier patch on the back of my neck, revealing the gland with most of it missing. Mark, do you know how painful it is to have a scalpel cut into a gland? Do you know how I was unable to sleep for nights because of pheromone confusion? All this pain is caused by you, and it reminds me all the time how cold-blooded and heartless you are. If possible, I hope you don't appear in my life anymore. I looked at this flustered and helpless man, tears welling up in my eyes. Charles held my hand tightly and took me home. I closed the door, buried my face in Charles's arms, and burst into tears. The accumulated grievances and sadness are like water bursting a dam. After 6 years of all I got was pain. Charles patted my back gently and said, "Cry. It will be better after this time." He held my face in his hands and gently wiped away the tears on my face with the tip of his thumb. 17. On the day when Charles was susceptible, the rich scent of grass woke me up from my sleep. He locked himself in his room and wouldn't let me in. It would be particularly difficult for Alpha to endure the susceptible period without the comfort of Omega. Anxiety and uneasiness were like a worm gnawing at the Alpha's heart. There was constant movement in the room, with rapid gasps accompanied by groans of pain. I released pheromones to appease him. "Charles, let me in." He refused in a deep voice. "No, I can't control myself now. I will hurt you. My glands have recovered. George, I want to have a gradual relationship with you." He leaned against the door and coaxed me in a hoarse voice. "Be good. I'm fine, don't worry." The sourness bursting from deep in my heart made my nasal cavity hurt. How lucky I am to meet Charles. Give me a shoulder when I cry. When others slander me, he stands by me and protects me without hesitation. When I am sad, he stays with me silently and tries every way to make me happy. I gripped the door handle tightly and made a decision in my heart. In the evening, I put the prepared meal on the dining table, went back to my room and closed the door. Charles opened the door and came out to eat. After he finished eating, I came out and hugged him from behind. Charles stiffened, his muscles tensing with stimulation. "George, please go back to your room." I shook my head and refused. "Charles, this is the first time I took the initiative to hug you. Are you sure you want to push me away?" "George, I have no self-control with you. Once I start, I can't stop." I pressed my face tightly against his back and bewitched him with my voice. "I am your Omega. You can do whatever you want of me." Charles turned slowly. Those eyes, so dark that they seemed to suck me in, contained a hint of ferocity, like a hunter firmly locking onto his prey. Before I could swallow my saliva, he hooked my waist and kissed me hard. Sparks splashed onto the dry wood, suddenly igniting a prairie fire. The scent of green grass wrapped me tightly. "It's a little painful. Just bear with it." I leaned obediently into his arms and gave myself to Charles with confidence. The fangs pierced the glands. The scent of green grass and bamboo are intertwined. The morning Charles's susceptible period ended, I woke up in his arms. He brushed my hair aside. A good morning kiss landed softly on my forehead. "George, thank you for your hard work." Those ink-black eyes contained a scorching light. I felt as if my heart was burned and was beating wildly. The scent of grass and bamboo blends together in a sticky way. The intertwined gazes gradually changed their meaning. We kissed passionately in the morning light. The susceptible period is 7 days, and Charles only gave me a temporary mark. Afraid that I would overthink it, he patiently explained, "Once your glands have fully recovered, we will perform lifelong marking." I nodded shyly with a blushing face. After that day, Charles moved from the second bedroom to the master bedroom. After the evening, Charles put his arm around my waist and said, "I'm going to the Capital Star to discuss a business deal in a few days. I want to take you to meet my friends. Are you willing?" No matter what he does, he always asks for my opinion patiently and respects every decision I make. The venue for the dinner was one of the best clubs in Capital Star, which was a membership-based club. Those who can become members are all nobles from the capital planet. Mark once tried to buy a membership with money, but failed. When I opened the door, the face inside made me feel a little nervous. They often appear on the Alliance News Network TV station and come from the Alliance's military and political ministries. I thought I was marrying an ordinary shepherd, but I didn't expect. Charles greeted them familiarly and then introduced me. George, the person in charge of my family's finances. 19. Through chatting, I learned that Charles is a retired colonel who went to Nanyang Star to retire after retirement. His friends teased him. You used to be as pure as a monk, but now you're clinging to someone and won't let go. He's so nice. What if I don't hold him tight and he runs away? The booing was like waves, one after another. My face turned red and I shrank into Charles's arms. Okay, stop it. He's thin-skinned. Everyone uttered a few sounds, looking as if they couldn't stand it. Charles's friends respect me as much as they respect him. I have been in a relationship with Mark for 6 years, but he rarely introduces me to his friends. After the dinner, I met Mark at the entrance of the club. The tired eyes brightened up. George. The light in his eyes instantly went out again. You have been marked by him. Charles protected me behind him, carefully blocking me tightly. The two alphas clashed, and the atmosphere became heavy. Mark, it's not a good habit to covet other people's omegas. George has made it clear that he doesn't want you to interfere with his life. Mark's eyes fell on Charles and eyes interlocked hands, and he smiled bitterly. George, I want to talk to you alone for a few minutes. There's nothing he can't hear. Just speak your mind. My Omega and I are just in a business marriage. I have no feelings for him. Oh, George, I regret this. Power is not as important as you. Mark, there's no point in you saying these things now. It just makes you look like a bad person. Mark's face froze, and he asked cautiously, if I let you choose again, would you still pursue me? I answered without hesitation. No, if I could, I would rather never have known you. 20. After Mark left, Charles held my hand tightly. I'm fine, you don't have to worry about me. He held me in his arms, holding my waist with one hand and touching the back of my neck with the other. He pieced the broken heart together and cared for it tenderly. From now on, he possessed it completely and absolutely. The day before returning to Nanyang Star, Charles took me to the famous couple's restaurant on Capital Star for dinner. Halfway through the meal, brilliant fireworks lit up outside the window and a waiter came over with a large bouquet of roses. Charles took the rose and then handed it to me. I haven't chased anyone much, don't think I'm vulgar. George, even though our steps are messed up, I will still help you with everything from confession, date, proposal, wedding. George, I like you. Will you be my boyfriend? The heart in my chest beats vigorously and passionately for Charles. I nodded slowly. I would like to. I am willing to spend my whole life in love with you. Charles, during the next Estrus period, let's do the lifelong marking. Not long after I returned to Nanyangsing, my Estrus season arrived as expected. This time, Charles was no longer a gentleman. The alpha's pheromones attacked me in an overwhelming manner. I stared at Charles with my eyes wide open, and his gentle look, the look when he coaxed me, and the look when he loudly said he loved me appeared in my mind. The scent of bamboo spread out and wrapped around Charles. The scent of bamboo and grass is blended together. Charles slowly moved closer to my ear, and the tingling sensation made my body tremble uncontrollably. The lips slid down and moved slowly along the side of my ear, and then pressed against the back of my neck. The hands around his neck kept tightening. The fangs pierce the glands and the pheromones are forcefully injected. The reproductive cavity is knotted and lifelong marking is completed. From this moment on, I belong to him completely and totally, and he belongs to me completely and totally. 21. Mark's perspective. As the heir of the Pei family, I have little time for myself. All I have are endless schoolwork and interest classes. Alpha's father said that since I am a member of the Pei family, I must work 1,000 times harder than others. George is a bright spot in my life. Those sticky calls of brother can eliminate my tiredness of the day. Unfortunately, the good times didn't last long. The Liu family encountered an unexpected change and went bankrupt. Not long after, the family moved. We met again at a cocktail party. The exquisite porcelain doll has grown up completely. Her face is only the size of a palm. Her facial features are incredibly delicate. Her lips are red and her teeth are white. She is the type that will stun you at first sight. He greeted me warmly. Seeing that I didn't say anything, he lowered his eyes a little sadly, and then smiled again in an instant. The 6 years I spent with George were the happiest and most relaxing 6 years of my life. In front of him, I don't have to be the heir who strives to be the first in everything. But the fact proves that people cannot be spoiled. During these 6 years, I squandered George's love wantonly, but never lowered my head to tell him that I loved him. In the game of business, the person who reveals his cards first is the loser. But love is not a game. I thought I was a winner, but in fact I was a complete failure. I can't give up everything I have, nor can I give up the efforts I have made to become a person in power. So, I personally put George on the operating table. I thought I would be cool. But when I saw George smiling happily in the arms of another alpha, I couldn't control the jealousy that was surging in my heart. That scene hurt my eyes. When George pointed at the hideous scar on the gland and cried, I realized how stupid I had been. His words were like wedges, hammering into my heart, word by word, causing pain. It turns out that he had been hurt by me. Big drops of hot tears fell into my heart. He said he would rather never have known me. He said he was very happy now and asked me not to disturb him. He took the alpha's hand and walked away without looking back. I slowly squatted down in the wind. The wind was so strong that it could take away the tears on my face at any time, but new tears still rolled down.